Welcome to A Stories and Tales, the channel where we bring you the best stories and fairy tales from around the world. In today's video, we will be reading the enchanting story of The Palace of the Night by Henry Beston. This captivating tale takes us on a journey with Prince Porphyrio as he sets sail for the Emperor's city in search of Lady Liria, encountering magical creatures and facing danger along the way. Through his courage and determination, Prince Porphyrio learns valuable lessons about love, loyalty, and the power of the human spirit. So sit back, relax, and let us take you on a journey of adventure and wonder. Once upon a time there was an emperor of the Isles, who had but one son, the Prince Porphyrio. On the day which beheld the prince's coming of age, the emperor summoned the youth to his council chamber, and said to him, "Dear son, when you were a little child, I pledged to you the hand of the Lady Liria, daughter of my friend and ally, the Emperor of the Plain. You are now of age, and I would fain send you forth to find the princess and win her for your own." Then replied the tall, golden-haired prince, "Dear father, give me but a brave ship and a gallant crew, and I will this very eve set sail for the Emperor's city and greet the Lady Liria." Pleased with this speech, the Emperor gave orders that a fine ship be swiftly prepared for the voyage. And this was done. And now it was night, and the vessel lay waiting, her sails gleaming green-white in the moonlight, her ladder shrouds gently swaying against the pale and starry sky. When came the ebb of the midnight tide, the anchors were weighed, the great sails trimmed to the breeze, and the vessel piloted forth to the measureless plain of the sea. Now it came to pass, as the great ship sped upon her furrowed way, that Porphyrio took it into his head to visit the fair of the Golden Bear, and fled before the wind to the festival city. Little by little, for the air was but light, the ship left behind her the blue of the deeps, and entered the green waters of the shallows. Suddenly there was a cry of "Land ho!" and from afar, over the landward hastening waves, Porphyrio beheld the great tower of the fair. A giant golden image of a bear, standing erect, crowned the high tower top, and shone dully bright above the haze. At sundown the prince, accompanied by his mariners, found himself in the midst of the great fair, in the very heart of the din. The medley of outlandish costumes, the babble of strange tongues, and the shrill cries of the shopmen and the merchants. Surely there was never such a marketplace as the Fair of the Golden Bear. Everything in the world was there to be bought and sold. At one booth a venerable man in a scholar's gown and velvet cap sold words, rare words, rich words, strange words, beautiful words, and drove a brisk trade with a crowd of poets and lovers. At another an old woman in green sold rosy glasses to those who were at outs with the world, and at still another a joyous fellow in blue offered sunbeams, which he had caught in a mirror and imprisoned in bits of magic glass. Porphyrio was quite delighted with the sunbeams, which shone night and day, like diamonds aflame with golden fires. "The Lady Liria will surely be pleased with one of these," thought he, and purchased the finest of all. Now it came to pass that, as he walked about the fair with his retinue of sailor men, Porphyrio caught sight of a rustic fellow in brown corduroys who was carrying a sea bird in a wicker cage. And because he loved the wild folk of the sea, the prince said to the countryman, "Good friend, whither go you with your bird?" "To the animal merchants, sir," replied the fellow. "'Tis a wild bird which I found in my field on a morning after a storm. Only look, sir, it wears a circle of feathers on its head, for all the world like a crown." "Why, so it does," said the young prince. "Come, will you sell him to me?" "Oh yes, indeed, sir," replied the countryman. "'Tis yours for a florin of gold and a penny of silver." And he held out his hand for the sum. "Good," said Porphyrio, and he paid the money. Then, to the countryman's amazement, he threw open the door of the cage, and allowed the sea-bird to escape. With a glad cry, and a mighty beating of its gray wings, the creature climbed into a splendor of the sunset, dwindled to a black speck, and vanished from their eyes. Once more the prince set sail. For a few days the weather remained tranquil and fair. Then came a night of cloud, and a rushing wind, which increased during the day to a hurricane. Now arose a great din, the howling of the wind through the shrouds, the cracking and straining of the timbers of the ship, the cries of the sailors, and the roaring and foaming of the deep. All night long, through the wild ocean dark, the prince's ship drifted nearer and nearer the unknown waters of the southern sea. Suddenly, just before the dawn, a tremendous noise was heard. The vessel trembled throughout her length, and crashing down once more on a hidden reef, broke apart. A huge wave swept Porphyrio from the deck. Some wreckage hurled itself upon him, and he knew no more. When he woke again, close upon noon, he found that the waves had carried him to the stony beach of a dark and unknown isle. A stately wall of cliffs of the strangest dark blue stone girdled it about. To the left, to the right, the rampart swept, solemn, unscalable, and huge. One broken mast of the prince's ship still rose forlorn above the tumbling waters on the reefs, but of the gallant crew there was never a sign. With a heavy heart Porphyrio trudged off to look for shelter and for aid. Long hours followed he the curving shore, even till the sun, which had been shining in his face, little by little crept to the side and shone behind, yet never away to the headland's height stood forth in the sheer and somber wall. And now, of a sudden, and by great good fortune, for the tide was rising, Porphyrio, turning the base of an advancing crag, found himself close by a noble promontory that sloped from the cliff top to foundations in the sea. Half climbing, half dragging himself along the stones and terraces of this ridge, the prince attained at last the height of the blue wall. A great dark isle lay open before him, a solitary isle of shadowy lands, gloomy woods, and rocks and hillocks of the same dark stone he had marked before. Save for the faint murmur of the encircling sea below, and the sighing of the wind, the isle was as silent as a land beneath the deep. Indeed, so still and dark it was, that it seemed as if the night reigned there, forever untroubled by the day. In the very heart of the gloom, its mighty walls and blue battlements lifted high against cloud mountains gathered in the west. A stately palace rose. After a long, winding journey through a wood dark as a leafy cave, Porphyrio arrived at the portals of the dwelling. The palace was as silent as a stone. Of silver were its massy doors, and they were sealed and barred, and from turret to foundation stone its windows were with silver shutters closed against the day. Not a sign or a memory of living things was there to be seen. Wondering in his heart at the mystery, Porphyrio presently made his way into a noble garden, wherein were pools and basins of blue water rimmed about with silver, and tall, dark trees stately as night. Again to his wonderment, the prince beheld that the flowers in the garden were such as opened only in the night. The pale, fragrant jasmine hid there, the moonflower dreamed, and the shy star daisy gathered her petals before her face. Suddenly the prince heard steps behind him, and turning swiftly, beheld a fair princess gazing at him with eyes in which wonder, alarm, and hope might all be seen. "Speak. Who are you? What do you here?" said the princess quickly. To this Porphyrio replied that he was a prince who had been shipwrecked on a voyage. And he told the princess of his adventures. "Alas," replied the lady, "you have come to the dark land. Know you not into whose power you have fallen? This dark isle is the dwelling of the magician of the night, who rules the fairy world from sunset to the morn. When comes the dawn, his mighty power wanes, and he and his people of the night hasten to this locked and shuttered palace, here to lie hidden from the sunlight, which is their enemy and deadly fear. I alone go forth, for I, alas, am a mortal. But hearken to my story. I am the Princess Liria." Porphyrio started. "My father is the Emperor of the Plain. On Midsummer Eve, as I was walking with my handmaidens in the garden, a messenger from my father arrived bidding me come at once to the great hall of state. I obeyed the message, and going to the hall, found there the magician of the night, who had just presented a haughty petition for my hand. Because of his fear of the magician, my father was very ill at ease. All looked to me for an answer. I replied courteously that, though I felt highly honored at the demand, I nevertheless felt bound to refuse, for I had been affianced since childhood to another. For you must know, good prince, that my father was long the true friend and ally of the Emperor of the Isles, and had pledged my hand to his only son, the Prince Porphyrio. Would that this were all I had to tell. But woe to me! Scarce had the magician, with a mocking smile, bowed low and disappeared into the night, when a terrible storm of his contriving descended upon our unfortunate city, overturning our tallest towers and strewing ruin far and wide. Our torches quenched by the rain and wind, my maidens and I took refuge in a great chamber of the north turret. At the height of the storm, the wind suddenly burst open the double portals. There came a great flash of lightning and a roar of thunder. And I beheld the magician standing tall and motionless between the doors, surrounded by a dozen of his creatures of the night. I cried out, but his servants seized me and led me forth. Great wings bore me upward through the very torment of the heavens. A darkness fell on me, and I knew no more. When I awoke, I found myself here in the palace of the night. Farewell, dear land of the golden plain, whose harvests I shall never more see. Farewell, dear Prince Porphyrio of the Isles. But I am Porphyrio, cried the prince, and I was on my way to find you, noble Liria, when the storm swept me to this isle. You may be sure the heart of the princess leaped when she heard these tidings. Forgetting that he was himself but a shipwrecked wanderer, much in need of aid, the prince, like the brave fellow that he was, could think of nothing but of rescuing his lady from the dark magician. As for the princess, she could think of naught but the plight of Porphyrio, tossed friendless and forlorn upon the isle. But at length she shook her head and smiled. Today, said she, is mine, and tomorrow also. But the magician has bidden me be prepared for the wedding feast by sundown on the following day. But, look, the shield of the sun breaks the storm clouds close above the waters. Twilight approaches. The hour of the magician is at hand. You must go. Hide yourself well tonight, and come to the garden tomorrow when the chimes ring thrice. On yon dark wall you will find some strangely shaped fruits growing. Fear not to eat of them when you hunger. Liria the unhappy bids you farewell, Prince Porphyrio. Farewell, princess, replied Porphyrio. Do not despair. We shall yet outwit the dark magician. And now the prince lay hid in the heart of a great tree, watching the doors and windows of the palace slowly opening in the twilight. Suddenly huge bells swung forth in waves of heavy sound, strange music played, and the 1,000 windows filled with the magic glow of moonfire. All night long the people of the night held festival, but at the break of dawn the silver windows closed slowly on their hinges. The music grew faint, and the murmur died away. On the second afternoon the prince, in his impatience, came early to the shadowy garden. The Princess Liria was not to be found, so Porphyrio wandered away into the dark alleys by the pools. Suddenly he found himself looking at his own reflection in a huge round mirror which 2 marble statues supported between them, one at each side. Happening to move a little, the prince discovered that his reflection did not move. He lifted an arm, the image remained motionless. He shook his head, the mirror gave no sign. Puzzled, Porphyrio left the spot, and saw his reflection remaining behind the glass. Presently he heard the welcome footsteps of Liria. And as the lovers walked and talked and discussed plans of escape, the prince chanced to tell of the mirror he had found. Uttering a little gasp of alarm, the princess cried, "Now we are lost indeed. Yon mirror is a mirror of memory, and reveals to the magician the faces of those who walk these paths. As soon as he sees your reflection therein, and he gazes into the glass every eve, his demons will be sent in search of you. There is one hope and one only. Ragingly angry with himself for being a meddlesome fool, Porphyrio hurried down to the sea and sought out the cave. Twilight was at hand. The tide was rising fast. Already the entrance was almost closed by the sea. Buffeted by the breakers and tossed against the cliff as he strode, the prince at length made his way into the cave and climbed to a shelf of rock above the height of the tide. A few minutes later, the water closed the entrance completely, thus imprisoning Porphyrio in a hollow darkness through which the ebb and flow of the outer sea swept with chuckles and whispering laughter. All night long waited Porphyrio in the cold, watery dark. Toward the end of the prince's vigil, the earth suddenly shook, the waters hushed, and through the silence and the dark Porphyrio heard the long thunder of a mighty overthrow. "What can that be?" thought he. When the first red rays of the sun streamed along the rocky floor of the cave, Porphyrio descended from his refuge and walked out of the cave mouth to the sea. Now, as Porphyrio walked along the shore, it came to pass that he discerned, deeply embedded in the bluish sands and lashed about with ropes of matted weed, the splendid painted chest which had lain in his cabin on the ship. Its brazen lock, though tarnished by the waters, was still highly clasped, but sea and stone had broken the wood loose from the hasps, and the prince had little difficulty in raising the lid. With a rueful smile he gazed down into his robes and fine array lying musty and sand-strewn within. There lay his prince's circlet of gold, here his jeweled sword of state, here the rich gifts he had meant for the Princess Liria. And among these, tucked away in the very corner of the chest, Porphyrio found the sunbeam he had purchased at the fair of the Golden Bear. "Were Liria armed with this," cried he, "the magician of the night could not prevail against her." At the thought, a new strength leaped in his weary heart, and he hurried along the cliff toward the promontory. The storm had now cleared away. The ocean thundered and broke into silvery white foam at the foot of the blue ramparts, and the Isle of the Night raised itself defiantly against a bright and royal sun. The magician, however, had not been idle. The mirror had told its story, a search had been made, a legion of creatures had sought Porphyrio in every corner of the isle. Compelled by the approach of dawn to abandon this pursuit, the magician resolved to render the island unapproachable from the sea. With a spell of tremendous power, he caused the promontory to break from the other cliff and fall in scattered and monstrous ruin to the beach below. It was the thunder of this overthrow which had shaken the earth and sounded through the cave. As a last precaution, the magician forbade Liria to leave the palace of the night, and locked and sealed the doors and windows, every one. Presently the prince, hastening along the beach, came in sight of the ruined headland, and a great fear laid its icy hand on his heart as he beheld the triumph of his enemy. How was he to reach the headland height? The cliff wall now circled the entire island without a break. League after league he trudged, along the shore, through the tide, searching for some way to scale the overhanging walls. Higher and higher climbed the sun. The shadows fell to the east, the afternoon waned, and still Porphyrio had found no path to the top. Desperate at last, he attempted to scale the steep face of the blue precipice. From ledge to ledge, climbing with torn fingers and aching arms, struggled the prince, and presently, his further advance barred, fell backward, faint and overcome, on a shelf of rock high above the sea. When his strength returned, he found himself close by an eyrie of sea-birds brooding on their nests in shelves and rifts of the rock. With a great clamor of piping and crying, the creatures rose startled from their nests, so filling the air with wings that Porphyrio closed his eyes. Suddenly the master of the eyrie, uttering a joyous call, swept down close to the prince, and with an upward surge of his heart Porphyrio recognized the winged king whose freedom he had purchased at the fair of the Golden Bear. And now the sea birds gathered about the prince, some gathering folds of his garments into their talons, others lifting him on broad wings, till presently he was borne from the narrow ledge and the sound of the sea into the splendor and silence of the sky. The end of day was at hand. Unveiled of any wisp of cloud, the fiery sun lay just above the western waters, its lower rim almost resting on the waves. Once again approached the hour of the magician of the night. The cloud of sea-birds flew inland over the blue isle, and settled to earth at the very doors of the palace of the night. And opening his arms to them, Porphyrio cried aloud his thanks as they wheeled and fled. The prince walked boldly to the great door, and blew a loud blast on the warder's horn. There came no answer to his call. The palace of the night remained silent and dark. The sun's rim dipped. A little breeze made its way from the sea through the mysterious gardens. The flowers of the night stirred like sleepers in a dream. "O jewel of the sun," cried Porphyrio, "give me now your aid." And with these words he touched the sunbeam to the lock. A crack resounded, then a shattering crash, and the doors swung open wide. Hastening on twixt other and other doors, and through heavy tapestries, Porphyrio at length found himself at the threshold of the great hall of the palace of the night. Rich hangings of dark blue velvet, strewn with stars of silver and gold, hung from the giant walls. 1,000 lamps of pale moonfire swayed on silver chains from the unseen height o'erhead. There were huge columns and dark aisles. To one side of the hall, by a silver throne raised upon a dais, stood the magician of the night, his arms folded on his breast. Proud and pale by his side, near a second throne, stood the Princess Liria. About them were gathered the people of the night. As the doors parted, all turned to gaze at Porphyrio. Fixing his dark eyes upon the prince, the magician spake a terrible incantation, but his words shattered themselves against the sunbeam as a threatening wave breaks to drift and foam against a crag. "Seize him," commanded the magician. At these words a host of dark beings surged about Porphyrio, encircling him, yet afraid to attack. Porphyrio took Liria by the hand and led her toward the door. But even as he did so, the magician caused awesome silvery fires to bar the outward way. At the horizon's edge, the waters were leaping up about the sun. Baffled by the flame, Porphyrio, still guarding Liria, fought his way toward a great stair at the very end of the hall. In the wall there, barred with silver and shuttered with stone, a giant circular window faced the west. And now there rose a tumult through the hall, and sounds of magic and thunder. Nothing daunted, Porphyrio touched the sunbeam to the window bar, and threw the double shutters open wide. The sun was yet above the wave, sky and water were aflame, and the great tide of sunlight swept into the palace of the night like the music of many trumpets. From all within the palace a great wailing cry arose that presently died away. When Porphyrio and Liria turned to gaze, the magician and his people had vanished, conquered, and forever powerless. And the velvet hangings were but cobwebs clinging to the walls, and the lamps of moonfire but empty shells. Then Porphyrio and Liria walked hand in hand to the darkening sea, and beheld there a brave merchant ship which the sea-bird was guiding to the isle. You may be sure it did not take the jolly mariners long to rescue the lovers from the headland. And thus the prince and princess fared to Liria's realm, where their marriage was celebrated with the greatest ceremony. In time Porphyrio became a king and Liria a queen, and thus they lived happily ever after. And that was the Palace of the Night, a magical story of adventure, love, and the human spirit. We hope you enjoyed this tale as much as we did. The journey of Prince Porphyrio and Lady Liria reminds us that no obstacle is too great when we are motivated by love and determination. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories and fairy tales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Stories and Tales.